Hello, everyone. Welcome to another 2023 FallDocs screening. My name is Armando Zamudio, and I am the Public Programs and Events Coordinator here at IDA. For our blind and low vision attendees, I'm going to describe myself. I am wearing a black shirt with a black jacket. I have glasses with messy hair, and I am sitting in front of a white wall. Thank you to our media sponsors, KCRW and Variety, for sponsoring our 2023 FallDocs. This evening, we'll have a conversation between film journalist Steve Green, director Nisha Pajia, executive producer Dev Patel, whose film To Kill a Tiger premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. To see more amazing films like this, please visit www.documentary.org/FallDocs. Now, before we get started, I would like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize the Gabrielino Tongva as the past, present, and future caretakers of the land, water, and cultural resources in the unceded territory of Los Angeles. Thank you so much to Andrea Lust for ASL interpreting this discussion. And with that, I will pass it on to Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining our conversation today about the film To Kill a Tiger. My name is Steve Green. I'm a freelance writer based in Los Angeles. I'll be moderating today's conversation. For our blind and low vision attendees, I am going to describe myself. I am wearing a buttoned blue shirt, glasses, and a beard, and I'm sitting in front of a blank wall. Nisha?
I am a South Asian woman. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. I'm in New York City in a hotel room, happily ensconced.
And would you like to say your name for?
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. I'm Nisha Pahuja, I'm the director of To Kill a Tiger.
And Dev?
Hey, I'm Dev Patel. I'm one of the executive producers on the film. I'm wearing a blue and white striped t-shirt. I'm sitting in my hotel room in New York with terrible bed hair.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for joining us today for this conversation. I mean, there are a number of places that we could start, but I think, aside from just sort of the empathy and care that all documentary film needs, Nisha, what were some of the guiding principles and ideals that you kept in mind throughout this process?
We're like diving right in, huh, Steve?
Yeah. I might as well. Yeah.
I would say, I would say for sure the idea of being non-judgmental. I think that for me is sort of is an approach that I think I've sort of come to, over the years. The importance of actually being non-judgmental, and even with people whose views are obviously contrary, to yours, but the importance of actually hearing them out, and the importance of understanding their perspective, and also knowing that their perspective is rooted in something that is so much larger, and often forces that are beyond our control. We are ultimately all products of our time and place, and so that doesn't mean I'm an apologist for certain behaviors, but I do try to understand and put things into context.
And Deb, from your perspective, when you first saw the film, what were some of the things that stood out to you that you really responded to that made you want to be more involved in this process?
I mean, I had a very physical reaction to the documentary. On the contrary to Nisha, who, she talks about kind of, I was kind of quivering with so much emotion, rage being one of them, unfortunately. And also just wanting to just be a part of it in any way possible. Like, I've spent a lot of my career, working in India, and really seeing these, newspapers filled with columns upon columns of stories of horrible cases of sexual violence against women and minors, and it's something that it's impossible to ignore. And what Nisha captured in this story, it's kind of through the brutality and harshness, there's this kind of wonderful miracle that kind of happens, which it was truly gripping. And it kind of also plays like a thriller in some way, the documentary, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, sort of what you mentioned about how this film is structured, how it plays out. Nisha, for you, this film deals so much with the passage of time and the idea that seeking justice isn't something that happens right away. Mm. How did you go about refining the pacing of this film and sort of seeing how much time the audience could spend with all of these people as they await what was going to happen, where ultimately this ends up?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's interesting because I knew two things. I mean, one, I knew that what Ranjit was going to go through, once it was clear that we actually had access and that, we'd be able to follow the story from beginning, middle to end, it was really clear to me, just given all of the things that he was dealing with, that what he was on essentially was a hero's journey, so that it was this kind of a perfect kind of structure. We had that inherently in just what he was going through. And of course, those obstacles were going to be what made it so fascinating, where those obstacles were both kind of outside of him. They were external, but they were also internal. He was grappling with what it means to be a man. He starts drinking at some point. And as we were editing, I kept saying to Mike, my editor, we need to slow down. We're moving too fast. It's too fast. It's not feeling right. Like, we need to hold on that shot longer. And I couldn't understand why instinctively I kept feeling that. And Mike is such a brilliant editor. And at one point, the penny dropped for him. And what he said is, what we're craving is a pacing that honors Ranjit. It's actually him that is setting the pace of the film. That's why you're feeling like it's too rushed, because it's actually not sort of honest, to who he is as a human being. So once we realized that actually became sort of a guiding principle in terms of the pacing of the film and the edit of the film.
What kind of time did you spend with Ranjit before the cameras rolled? I imagine that's a time where you're building a lot of trust, and especially with a family that's dealing with so much, that adding this on top of that must have been something that you needed to convince everyone involved in some way that this was something that was going to do more good in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't spend any time with him, actually. I mean, it happened. What happened, and I started filming right away, right? Because I was actually, as Dev knows, like, I was actually following the work of an NGO. I was, the film that I was making was a very different film, and I was actually focused on the Srijan Foundation and Mahindra Kumar, the activist in the film, and focusing on their work with men and boys in terms of masculinity and changing masculinity in India. That was the original focus. And then Ranjit was part of, the work that this NGO was doing. He was sort of enrolled in one of their programs. And that's how I came across the story. It was really through the NGO. So there was no time to prepare or to get to know him. And literally that scene, the way the film starts is Amit goes into Ranjit's house and says, "Tell me about what happened, that night." Literally, that was the first time I met the family, or, it was just, we started rolling as soon as we met. I think the intimacy that we were able to achieve over time as a crew, that really took several months. That took a lot of time to establish. And when we would just go there and sometimes just kind of hang out for hours, and just film a little bit. And eventually they started to get more and more comfortable in front of the camera. And that, I think one of the reasons the film is effective for people is that I think they feel that they're experiencing the journey. They're actually literally going on the journey with the family. There's that distance isn't there, and I think that has a lot to do with how comfortable the family was with us, and really invited us in a way that was very deep and intimate.
I imagine one of the biggest challenges of any documentary when you have a main subject, or in this case, a main family, is when to introduce them to an audience. Sometimes the film begins with them, sometimes you only meet them after you know certain things about them. How did you talk about when to sort of first show this family, and what kind of context the audience might need going into for what they're going through?
Mm-hmm. Well, we showed the film to the family. We showed the fine cut of the film to the family. I guess over a year ago now, just months before TIFF, because we wanted to. We took so long to make the film and to edit the film, and by the time we were finished, the survivor had turned. She was 18, so we could actually show her if she gave us permission. So we showed the film to the family, and that's when she, that's when she came forward. I think, for me, one of the big sort of challenges about making this film, and one of the sort of the deepest kind of ethical consideration was obviously her, and her comfort, and whether to show her or not to show her, how to hide her identity, all of those sorts of things. And even the way we talk about the film, even when we talk about what happened to her, all of that stuff has very much been dictated by her and her comfort level. So
yeah, and I you have so many other people here involved in the film, in on camera in these interviews, to give context for what's happening, and not just people in their family, but everyone from the defense attorney through people in various stages of government. Is part of that just the natural, these are all the people that we need to talk to get a full picture of the story, or were there certain people that you sought out specifically because you knew what perspective they might be able to bring to what was happening?
Yeah, no, it's actually the first. It was just ensuring that, all of the bases were covered, and, we had every sort of aspect and every element of the story covered. I did actually even try to film with the men, with the perpetrators. And I did go to the prison and actually meet with them. And they didn't want to be on camera, but I did, I did want to speak to them, right? I did want to interview them, but they wouldn't come forward. Yeah.
And various people throughout the film have some entrenched ideas as to the way things should be based on how things have been in the past. And I think it would be easy to make those films very plain villains. But like you said at the beginning, like, this is about sort of empathy for a way of seeing the world. And the film puts a lot of those ideas into context of understanding what the response might be to an act of violence like this. And I guess because you mentioned earlier, how did that sort of continue over throughout this process of making sure that you were able to present these other ideas of how society should be structured and how we should respond to this in a way that understood their context, while not that understood that context, I guess?
Yeah. I think, that was sort of a deliberate. I think I would like to think that it's kind of baked into the DNA, it's sort of baked into the DNA of the film. It's baked into the DNA of myself and the team that I work with, right? We're all, I think we all sort of vibrate on that same frequency. And when we were in the edit room, I actually had two editors, right? So I've worked with two editors. I've worked with Dave Kazala and Mike Munn, and that was, it was such an extraordinary experience. So at one point, Mike says that we were like this sort of brain, right? This sort of three people all sharing one brain. And I think really sort of in-depth conversations, deliberate kind of choices in terms of shots and cuts. And even the music, we tried a lot to make sure that we weren't projecting and that we were just presenting, right? Like this feeling of just, we've invited you into this world, and it's up to you to kind of make your decision, but we are going to not pass judgment, you know, in terms of how we present all sides of the story. And, you know, if I could just say one thing, actually, it's really interesting. I think in the film, the ward member, I don't know how Dev feels about the ward member, but I know that a lot of people have a lot of problems with the ward member. You got to tell me what you think of him, Dev. But, you know, a lot of people had issues with the ward member. And I love the ward member. And when I showed him the film a few months ago, because I went to India to stress test the film, like just to make sure that, you know, the family was okay with it, everyone that was involved was okay with it. And I was terrified about showing the film to the ward member, but I showed it to him, and his response at the end was extraordinary. And what he said after watching it is that he felt ashamed of himself, and he felt that everyone in the community and in that region needed to see the film in order to understand what they had put that family through. You know, so I think that's something to be said about that approach, right? If you just sort of approach things non-judgmentally and using empathy as the guide, then it's possible to change people's minds.
It really is a credit to your touch, Nisha, like the kind of delicacy of how you approached it. Like, you know, you really put a mirror up, and that's the real beauty of filmmaking, really, is that, you know, you kind of let them observe themselves from the outside in, and it's great that it's actually the story, that this piece of art is actually going to be a teacher to people out there. You know, there's a line, you know, from one of the Srijan women when she goes and sits with a group of women in the documentary, and she's like, I want you to just try and think of this not like a typical Indian village woman. And it's like, from the outside, you're like, oh, what does that mean? But it's like, you know, there isn't that education or that perspective. So that's an amazing, reaction you got from the warden, who's probably one of the most rigid men to feature in the documentary. To see that change is huge.
Yeah, I think it was such a shock. I think all of us that were watching the film with them were just completely blown away. It's like, really?
Yeah, that guy.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, Dev, you mentioned your response to the film seeing for the first time, and you mentioned that this was a subject area you were broadly familiar with. Was there something specific that you took away after seeing it? Was there something that surprised you? Something that you were particularly weren't expecting?
Steve, I think it's not even broad. Like, you know, every one of my friends in India, anyone that I've ever collided with, unfortunately has a story or has experienced some form of predatory, you know, sexual behavior, you know, so much so that a friend of mine actually passed away from being raped and killed. And for me to see, you know, this young woman, you know, so clever, so much potential just extinguished like that. You know, I read about her, Monica was her name, in the newspapers, and it crushed me. And so, like, watching this film is really, really important, actually. And yeah, it was you know, for me, I guess coming from the privilege that I get to come from, growing up in the UK and you know, that kind of thing, you know, I guess I associate the idea of like fighting for something to require a real fight. Like, I'm talking like, you know, marching and you know, showing some form of like overt kind of stance on something. But actually this is a story of quiet resilience, you know, in a way. Like, when you think of the father in this, Ranjit, I think of like the everyman, the you know, the people that are the voiceless in this huge country, that are literally the lifeblood of this country. And, you know, to watch this man try and succeed in a system that is kind of almost set up to make him fail is so heartbreaking. You know, the tragedy of watching this man being battered, you know, left and right, and you know, he can't even afford to get the cab ride to go to the courthouse, and then he's got to bribe the officials, and it's, you know, it's a tale of real resilience, actually, you know, and how much of a father's love can be a propellant and a driving force for good.
And I think another thing, yeah. Oh, sorry, Nisha, please.
No, that's so beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And I think another thing is that from the way the sort of the arc of the film, you see these tiny breakthroughs. You see the moments where someone's mind is slowly being changed, but there's no real one sort of the clouds part and all of a sudden someone realizes something and they instantly change and they live their life the different way going forward. I think in one way, from a filmmaking standpoint, that might seem like a challenge to not have that one moment that you can build the rest of the film around. But at the same time, I wonder if you think that makes the film more effective in the long run, because it shows that you can change people's minds in slow increments rather than having to confront and make that one moment happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, in the edit room, we had a number of conversations about, you know, how do we show Ranjit's vulnerability? Do we show the fact that he drinks? You know, do we show the fact that he's almost kind of like veering off course, right? Like those were, you know, when you're thinking of things that you can edit down and lose, and oh my God, it's 2 hours long, right? It's easy to sacrifice complexity for story, for narrative, for simple narrative, right? But that felt so disingenuous, and it felt so dishonest, and it felt like that wasn't the truth, you know? And it's not the truth of anybody. It's not the truth of any of us, right? And when you talk about change, it never happens suddenly or quickly, never. You know, it is, as you say, increments. It is small, it's tiny steps. And that's why when you think of a country like India, which is such a complicated place, as you know, as Dev will have experienced and I have experienced, you know, you realize that, you know, the sort of boots on the ground, like the work of these grassroots organizations, like literally kind of going and changing hearts and minds, you know, by speaking to people one at a time. It's so important, right? Like you obviously have to push in that way, but you also have to push systems change, and you know, you need laws to change. You need you need it to operate on many different levels. But to, you know, to bring it back to the film, to make it to make it simple narratively is actually, you know, wouldn't have been the truth, right? And I feel that the film is actually stronger because it's it is more nuanced, you know, and it is more sort of complex.
Yeah, to watch him waver is one of the most engaging parts of the story, you know, and it really, you know, we don't put a Hollywood bow on it. It really is the most human story there is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that sort of keeps this from being, like you said, a simple story is that at a certain point, when her life is threatened, the act of making this film becomes in its own way part of the story. Was there a point in this process where you realized that was happening, or was that something that by being there and by being in that atmosphere that was sort of inevitably going to happen?
Yeah, I think I was aware really early on that myself and the crew were having an impact. You know, it's a strange thing, right? Because there is no such thing as a doc crew or a camera not affecting reality, not having an impact, right? It's just inherent in the art form, and you know, it's just a part of what happens. In this case, there were a lot of ethical considerations for us, and there was a lot of reflection and a lot of conversations, you know, a lot of them on camera and a lot of them off camera. I mean, one of them we include, right, where we say to Ranjit, are we affecting this? Like, what are we doing here, right? Like, is it us? And of course it was. Of course that was part of it. So I think we did become a part, you know, we obviously did become a part of the story. And again, I didn't want to shy away from that, right? And that was another sort of choice that we really made to kind of keep this, you know, the scene where we're being threatened by the villagers, and then we go to Shrijan the next day and say, okay, guys, look, this happened, right? And what do we do? And it could affect you. We could have easily not included that in the film. It would have been so easy to just go from her rehearsing her testimony to then going to the testimony itself. But it felt like we had to show the audience the truth, you know, and we had to sort of explain to them that there's, you know, there is this relationship between what we do as filmmakers and what audiences consume as well, right? That even the act of viewing something, the act of witnessing, there are ethical considerations around it, right? There's something that you have to realize about this. It's not antiseptic, you know? So it was definitely a tricky thread to navigate, Steve. It really was. Yeah.
You mentioned the testimony. Obviously, the cameras couldn't go inside the courtroom for that moment, but you are able to play it. And there's a black background for the first part. But then what was the process like for figuring out an image that could represent that moment in what she was feeling and what she was sort of relaying to everyone who was there? Yeah.
So actually, you know, her testimony, like what we use as her testimony, is actually not her actual testimony, because we weren't, obviously she can't be mic'd and there's no, you know, cameras allowed. So this was taken from a conversation that she was having with the public prosecutor just before she went into the courtroom. And what was that like? We tried a lot of different images there, you know, in that to kind of represent. And it really was just sort of trial and error. And, you know, we had shots of, there was some really beautiful images of her. There was at one point just all black, which was also quite effective. There were many different things that we tried, but the clouds just felt so perfect. Like they were evocative and beautiful at the same time. And there was just a poignancy, you know, about using, you know, just nature to kind of describe that churning and that, you know, just what had happened to her. It just felt right, you know. So yeah.
There is a postscript at the end of the film, sort of letting audiences know what has happened since then. Are there any details after what's included there that anyone who would be interested to know about what might have happened since?
Well, you know, so we did actually a few months ago. We actually took Kieran and her dad to the UK for screenings, and so it was the first time they'd seen the film with an audience, and that was really, really powerful. And so we've launched a large impact campaign around the film. So we're going to be working in the United States, and we're also going to be working in India. And so we're going to try to bring them to the US for screenings and for work here, you know. So I think, I mean, obviously, I don't want to give away the ending of the film, so I won't say anything. But you know, it's they're still. I think they want to be involved in getting their story out and inspiring, you know, people. So yeah.
And so Dev, for your part, I obviously awareness that this is something that a lot of people are facing is one of the goals of a film like this. From your perspective, regardless of how much knowledge people might have of this going in, what are some of the things that you hope people can take away from this? Not just sort of knowing that it exists, but actions they can take going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is, like, I've never been so confident about something I've been involved in. Like, it really is, it really motivates you, like it did me, to want to do something. So I think the first giant step is to just watch it. and truthfully, it's a credit to Nisha and a credit to, you know, all those wonderful beating hearts within the film. But you know, I am so enamored, and you know, like in COVID, watching those, you know, those first responders still working out, they were like heroes, they were like angels, they were gods. I look at the members of the Srijan Foundation in this, like going out to these arid, remote parts of India and facing a barrage of people and trying to change people with empathy and knowledge and compassion and patience. You know, I've just done a film which is my directorial debut, and it's kind of dealing with similar issues, but it's a story of revenge. And this was a teacher for me, and I was like, oh God, if I could go back, this is the flip side of the coin. But I think people will be truly humbled when they watch this movie, and I feel like it doesn't just apply to India, this movie. You know, this is happening around the world. This is happening in Iran. It's happening, you know, everywhere. You know, and it you know, for me as a male being a part of this, we need men to watch it too. You know, I think we need to educate our brothers and our sons and our nephews and our cousins on what's right and wrong, and those lines get blurred when people don't have access to education. You know, when they are, you know, kind of drowning in poverty, these issues take second place. You know, they haven't learned those things, and also there's lots of societal kind of structures. But yeah, I feel like, you know, this is truly universal, and you know, like I said, this film is actually, through the pain, a kind of miracle happens. It's a David and Goliath story to the highest extent. And if you see what this father can do with his daughter, and sorry, last thing, this is a long ramble, but also, you know, Kiran herself. I mean, I was so shocked at this 13-year-old who was kind of this unwavering moral compass in this story. And I hope for victims of such, you know, brutal assaults or whatever, that they look at this movie and they see this young girl, and it kind of gives them strength and emboldens them to speak out. And the last thing, sorry, this is now becoming a super ramble, but you know, there is a frustration in how, you know, don't want to give too much away, but you know, there's some corruption and some malpractice in the police forces. And you see that in this story, and that needs to improve. You know, we you know, and I think that again is a global issue. We've seen that very much in the Black Lives Matter stuff in America, but here too. You know, so that yeah. Sorry, there's a long ramble, but hopefully something made sense in there.
Yeah. Can I just sort of add a little bit to what you said, Dev, because you're absolutely right. And you know, the thing is, like, you know, what Mona said yesterday, you know, Equality Now, right? I mean, the fact is that, you know, the film itself is really specific, and it takes place in India in a small village, but you know, it's actually, it is so universal, right? That the fear that women have, sexual assault, sexual violence, the absolutely sort of abysmal conviction rates around the world. I mean, if you think about it, India's conviction rates are they're higher than the United States, right? So it's really important to recognize that this isn't something that just happens in India, you know? I mean, it happens around the world. And I think for us, what's really important is, and that's why it was so important that Dev, you know, joined forces with us, is it's important that there are men that you know, it's also about men, right? It is also about changing men and the way men think, and giving men a different way of being male, right? It's such a critical thing, and I think it's sort of the next step. It's actually the missing piece in all of this, right? In terms of gender justice. So
yeah, I think, you know, we faced this with Slumdog, you know, way back in the day. The movie kind of got brushed aside as some weird thing that, you know, is about slums in India, and it's got foreign languages in it, and that's a huge barrier to entry for the kind of consumer. You know, I think that's a great shame. You've seen it with Slumdog, you've seen it with Parasite, you've seen it with all these great films. You know, the difficulty, you know, to get into the business end of it is you look at a trailer for a documentary like this and you're like, oh, it's kind of a dry desert and like, you know, poverty and like, oh, and I wanna really impress upon people that you sit down, and I challenge you not to want to watch more after watching it for 15, 20 minutes. Like really, I've never had such a physical reaction watching something. And you know, if you have a heart that beats, you will be moved. It will have an effect on you. And that's why, you know, I literally flew in from Australia yesterday to be a part of this with Nisha, because I believe in it so much. And I know, you know, it doesn't have the bells and whistles of lots of other documentaries and things like that. And it doesn't feel like a hot topic right now, but it is. It's always been a hot topic. Unfortunately, this is a kind of a different sort of epidemic, you know, that we need to really get to the root of and kind of fight.
Yeah.
Well, it's a roadmap for change in a lot of different areas. Thank you so much for sharing this with us and for this conversation today. Nisha, Dev, thank you so much. Andrea, thank you as well. To everyone watching, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your FallDocs experience.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Steve. Bye, Andrea. Thank you.
Bye.